Okay, it's 1 p.m. Eastern right now. We'll start just shortly. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Zina Amari with the Jordan Tourism Board North America. I work with the Faith Market, and our guest speaker today is Mr. Rustom Mkhjian, who's the Director General of the Baptism Site. Thank you, Rustom, again for joining us. One thing I just want to mention that due to the time difference, we decided to pre-record this. This was just pre-recorded earlier today, and we'll be here for till the end of it to get your questions. We'll answer as many as we can, and if we go over time, I'll make sure that once I send the recording, we also send you the answers to the questions. Again, thank you, Rustom, for being here, and I'm about to start the presentation.
Thank you, Zina.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. Today's webinar is called A Journey Through Bethany Beyond the Jordan. It is brought to you by Jordan Tourism Board North America. My name is Zina Amari. I'm the Faith-Based Partnership Manager at the JTBNA, and today's guest speaker is going to be Mr. Rustom Mkhjian, who is the Director General of the Baptism Site. Whenever we want to talk about this site, about Bethany Beyond the Jordan, the first name that comes to mind is Mr. Mkhjian, and not only because he has worked there for 23 years, but mainly because of the way he tells the story. He's so passionate about it, and whenever we send groups back home, one of the highlights by many is the experience that they had in Bethany Beyond the Jordan, and especially the story told by Mr. Rustom Mkhjian. Mr. Mkhjian has studied civil engineering, and he later specialized in monument restoration. He was first appointed as the head of the restoration team at the baptism site, and then he moved up as the assistant Director General, and right now, as of 2018, he has been the Director General of the Baptism Site Commission. I'm gonna give the presentation over to Mr. Rustom, but before I do that, I just want to let you know that this is going to be around 45-minute presentation, and after Mr. Rustom finishes his part, we're going to show a sample itinerary, and we're going to show a brief video before we take time to answer some of your questions. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. I'm really excited about it. And thank you again, Rustom, for being here with us.
Thanks ever so much, Zina, and our dear JTB group in North America. It's always a pleasure and honor for me to talk about this site with great importance to mankind. I think basically we're going to talk about the importance of the site, the important biblical events that took place there, and the archaeological remains that prove all of this. Moreover, other sources that show this is the authentic site where John started his ministry and baptized Jesus Christ. That's where Jesus started his ministry and Christianity physically started. Well, it was also protected by Muslims because many of the churches built there in antiquities continued to be built in Islamic periods too. That's the way we live in Jordan. That's a beautiful mosaic masterpiece, if you like. So I can talk about the site starting with Elijah's Hill, I think, and the wilderness of John the Baptist. If you have the second slide.
Yeah, I will move to the second slide, but I just want to add that after the story, please don't leave. We're going to be showing you a 3-minute video, and we're going to be answering some of your questions towards the end. Let's start.
Well, first of all, we need to know the map of the Middle East, basically, and I thought the best map to be used was the map that we had in antiquities in the Roman period, where we have different zones called different areas like the Decapolis, the Perea, Samaria, etc. But basically, I'm going to concentrate on the Perea, which is the wilderness of John the Baptist, the wilderness John described himself living in. So if we have a look at the next slide. Well, Jordan is a very important part of the Holy Land. Now, very many important biblical events took place here. Of course, if we start from up north, Qais or Gadara, it's where the first miracle of Jesus took place when he crossed the Galilee. We all know about that. Going a little bit further south, we have Pella, where first century Christians, if you like, ran away from the oppression in the west and took refuge in the eastern parts of the River Jordan, the Holy River Jordan. Then we have Jerash, Amman, with very important issues and events that took place there in antiquities. The baptism site is the gem of gems. I call it the gem of gems because whatever I say, you'll see later on the importance of the site, not only being the place that's of great importance for the three monotheistic religions, but it's of course of the greatest importance for Christians, basically because it started right there. MADABA is very well known for its most valuable, priceless mosaic map of the Holy Land, on which over 150 sites that are mentioned in the Bible are depicted. Mount Nebo, where Moses had his last look over Gilead and the West Bank and the Jordan Valley. The Dead Sea and its importance. Rasas is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and it includes Castrum. I don't want to concentrate a lot about the stories. At the end of the day, whatever I say, ladies and gentlemen, it's always important to know that without visiting these sites, enjoying them, and being in direct contact with the Bible, I sometimes call it the fifth gospel. You just see whatever you read in the Bible. So therefore, we can move on to the next slide and see how, let's get closer to the mosaic map, and note that the mosaic map I was talking about, the slide, the part on the right, on the right, is where we've discovered at the end of the 19th century, actually, the mosaic map of the Holy Land was discovered by coincidence, and I wanted to zoom in, and on the left we see the River Jordan, Jericho to the right at the bottom, Jericho, I don't know, it's right here. Can we see Jericho, Zina?
We can zoom.
Yeah, it's down south. At the middle, yeah, a little to the left, that's Jericho. This is Jericho. And then east of the Jordan, where we have the gazelle followed by a lion, that's the place or the wilderness of John the Baptist he described himself living in. We even see the place where we have Ainun now Sapsapas in Old Greek, and the cave, if you note. That's where the story began. And we know something ever so important, ladies and gentlemen, that we don't see animals depicted elsewhere on the entire and huge mosaic map that arrives to the southern parts of Lebanon, Syria, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Palestine, Israel, and Egypt. We only see animals right here in the Perea, in the place that's called the wilderness of John the Baptist. If you concentrate and see the significance of the gazelle and the lion, we all know the lion is a symbol of power, the king of the Perea, and gazelle is righteousness and goodness. So therefore, it reminds us of Matthew chapter 14, if you like, because we all know John criticized Herod the Tetrarch, the lion, the king of the wilderness here, Herod the Tetrarch, who married his brother's wife Herodia. And when Salome danced the famous dance, we all know how eventually John was beheaded in Macarius, only 45 kilometers to the southeast of the baptism site, actually. Even if you have a closer look at the river and the fish we see, we have one coming from to our left, yeah, from the north, going toward the Dead Sea, and the other one's coming back up from the Dead Sea. Now, the logical explanation is that nothing lives in the Dead Sea. So the fish comes back up north. But do we not also know that fish was a secret sign and symbol of Christianity? So when we have the two fish here, basically, it reminds us of Christianity starting right here, in the middle of the River Jordan, in the present Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, where we have the grotto pointed right here. Now, we can move on to the next slide. But actually, before we do so, sorry, I beg your pardon, let's talk about some biblical events that took place here linking us with Jericho. We all know Joshua chapters 1 to 5 tell us about Joshua led the 12 tribes of Israel from the eastern parts, from the geographical location of the baptism site today, toward Jericho to the south, to the west, sorry. That was the first entry of a prophet from east to the west of the Jordan. But the next incident was ever so important. In 2 Kings chapter 2, around 800 years before Christ, we know that Elijah, at the last day of his life, was ordered by our Lord to come toward the east. And what happened is the following. When Elijah arrived with his servant Elisha to the river Jordan, actually the moment his mantle touched the Jordan, it split. So they both walked on dry ground to the east, and there was a whirlwind that took Elijah up to heaven in a chariot and horses of fire. Now Elisha received the mantle. In other words, he received the prophecy and miraculously crossed the Jordan back toward Jericho, and the story continues. But what's ever so interesting is the very last words of the Old Testament, Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, which tell us that Elijah will be sent once again. Full stop. That's the end of the Old Testament. Do we not have a continuation in the New Testament? Indeed, we do. An example is Luke chapter 1, verse 17, where we know that John came in the spirit and strength of Elijah. So he simply comes to the place from where Elijah is taken up to heaven, and he lives in a simple cave baptizing the believers. Now, if you move on to the next slide, we'll see the wilderness of John, the river Jordan itself. It meanders. We see the green area that's called Sapsapas from, going up north, arriving to the upper part of the picture where the green ends. That's following Sapsapas, or the John the Baptist spring, actually, or John baptized the believers. Now, if we get closer to the next slide, we'll have a look at what happened up at Elijah's Hill. This is a picture of Elijah's Hill, where we've discovered in 1997 a monastery, an entire monastery built using every square inch of Elijah's Hill, the small, low hill where the three important biblical events took place. We've discovered a monastery that has churches, baptism pools, the place where monks lived, and we have a lot of documents saying that monks lived there up to at least the 8th century. In other words, after Islam got to our part of the Holy Land. If you move on to the next slide, we'll get a close-up to the cave where John lived. This is the cave where John lived, and ladies and gentlemen, of course, I cannot just claim this is the cave where John lived unless we have documents. We have two documents here to prove this. One of them is mentioned by Sophronius, the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church in Jerusalem, who actually handed over the keys of Jerusalem to Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab when he got to Jerusalem. Now, he mentions a very important event that took place in this cave. Actually, a priest called John wanted to follow the footsteps of prophets, and he crossed the Jordan coming from Jerusalem, wanting to arrive eventually at Mount Sinai, where Moses received the commandments. But when he got to the cave, he got sick. Actually, he had fever, and John appears to him in a vision, telling him you don't need to go to Mount Sinai. This cave is far more, much holier than the Mount Sinai. The priest wasn't convinced, actually, and stayed in the cave. He was getting worse, but the next day, John appears once again and says, this cave is a lot and much holier than Mount Sinai. He asked him now, John, the priest John asked John the Baptist, he says, who are you? He says, I'm John the Baptist, and here Jesus visited me a lot of times. Now, he asked to be healed, and he was instantly healed, and he ordered a church to be built around the cave. We know what we have on the western part, to our right, we have remains of 4 foundations over which an arch system held a church. So indeed, this cave was part of an integral part of a church. Knowing that churches consisted of 2 major parts, the apse and the nave, we see that the natural cave was the apse of the church that's built in the 6th century. Now, of course, a pilgrim from Vicenza also mentioned about the cave. His name was Antoninus, and whatever he described, we see right here. So we know this is the cave where John lived, started baptizing the believers. If we go to the next slide, we see the witness of John the Baptist. Now, I am so proud to say that the Board of Trustees of the Baptism Site Commission, that's headed by His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Muhammad, the cousin of His Majesty King Abdullah II, is the head of our Board of Trustees, and we have taken care of the site and protected and preserved it the way John and Jesus did. So we have 2 examples from the Bible that tell us the site is ever so similar. The reeds that we see in the valley, it was mentioned by Jesus when he said, what are you going to Bethany to see? Reeds being shaken by the wind, or a man dressed in a silk gown? Indeed, Jesus answers his question saying that those who wear silk gowns live in palaces, but who you see in this wilderness is a man who dresses in camel skin. He was talking about John the Baptist, of course, and he ate wild honey and locust. We see the small bushes at the lower part of our slide, where we have small plants, that are called yamvut in Arabic. They're prosopis in Latin, facta, and they happen to be the natural habitat for bees. So we see the small low hill where the 3 important biblical events took place is surrounded by the yamvut plants that happen to be the natural habitat for bees, as I said. So therefore, John lived in this simple cave, eating wild honey and locust, baptizing the believers in the small spring where we see reeds right now, actually. And the reeds, by the way, were mentioned, the spring, I beg your pardon, was mentioned by Antoninus from Vicenza, who said it arrives to the River Jordan only in rainy season. So actually today we don't see it, but if we're here in, let's say, December up to January, up to the late March, we'd see the spring actually. But when we get closer toward the River Jordan, we'll see the spring, and I'll have a slide later on to show that. Now, going along the spring of John the Baptist, midway between Elijah's Hill and the River Jordan, a caravanserai or pilgrim station was discovered. So we know that pilgrims throughout history, after Christianity was official, used the old Jericho Espas road that was built in the 2nd century. So therefore they extended this route, and Jericho Espas, or Hasban in Arabic, road was used by pilgrims to follow the steps of the prophets, and eventually they even arrived to Mount Nebo. Today, by the way, we're working very hard in collaboration with many partners, such as the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, JTB Jordan, and others, to revive this important trail. And hopefully soon, maybe, I guess by the end of 2021, we'll have this route ready for you to come and enjoy and visit, starting from Macarius, where John was beheaded, going to Madaba, to Mount Nebo, and then to the Gem of Gems, to the baptism site where Christianity started. So we're going to revive this old Christian pilgrimage route in our part of the Holy Land. We got further down, we see in the next slide, a large pool. You know something, as an engineer, I'll tell you honestly, our ancestors were great engineers, because they've designed a pool just close to the pilgrim station, just like 100 meters toward the west, and it happens to be around 40 meters higher than the level of the River Jordan today. Now, so it means the pilgrims who stayed in the pilgrim station could use this large pool to be baptized from the spring of John the Baptist, because there's a canal of water that brought water into the large pool to allow them to be baptized at the times when the river was in flood. Now, believe it or not, we 25 years ago built a pool, but it was 20 meters in level, lower than this one. So when the river flooded, it totally immersed it and kind of destroyed it. So therefore, our ancestors in many ways were better than us, specifically when they left us with these remains that tell us big stories. Now, moving on a little closer to the River Jordan, we see a lot of hermit cells. Among them, these two that overlook the River Jordan around 300 meters to the west. Now, these churches, by the way, if we get closer, these hermit cells, I beg your pardon, in the next slide, we'll see that they have toward the east a semicircular risen area. So I personally claim that these are basically the design of an early Byzantine church, having toward the east an apse and to the west a nave. So this is one of the hermit cells, the interior of one of the hermit cells that our ancestors dug in the Lee San Ma formation of the area. We get closer now in the next slide, and we see the spring that starts at Elijah's Hill, as I mentioned earlier on. But when we follow it today, we have the chance to go along it for about 6-7 minute walk within the tamarisk trees that get you to the Gem of Gems. We see the next slide, and the spring leads us to the area that we have shown in an arrow, where we see remains of churches built in memory of the baptism of Jesus. Now, to the west, the buildings we see further at the upper part of our slide, it's the west bank of the River Jordan now. In the background, further at the top part of the slide, we see Jericho to the right, specifically the remains of Jericho. So this is what actually connects us with the mosaic map of the map we saw earlier on in our slides. Now, if we get closer to the churches here, we'll see, exactly. This is the most important site in the baptism site. Right here, ladies and gentlemen, we have remains of 5 churches that are uniquely designed and built, and according to many sources, such as the biblical references, the mosaic map, the archaeological remains, and specifically the pilgrims' testimonies right here, we know this is the spot where John met Jesus and baptized him. Let's concentrate on this spot and see what we have, if you don't mind. First of all, we need to remember that the River Jordan actually surrounded these remains in antiquity. Now, today, and around 15 years ago, we had a professor from Missouri University called Tina Nemi, who's a professor in geology and archaeology, actually. She wrote a great report about how the Jordan meandered away from this area. Her examination of the geology and archaeology of the area proved that the Jordan meandered away. It's now around 100 to 150 meters away from these remains. But when we have floods of the Jordan that occur, let's say every 10 years or so, then it covers this area. What's so special about this and what we see? We have remains of 5 churches, as I said. I think in the next slide we have the first church that's described. No, probably we don't have it. Let's go back to the slide if you don't mind. Sorry. Yeah. Well, actually, the first pilgrim would describe a church being built at a place where our Lord was baptized, mentioned remains of John the Baptist Church, or actually he mentioned the John the Baptist Church itself that was built high on piling system, on a series of piers to protect it from the floods of the Jordan. Actually, today we have rediscovered the remains of a set of 18 piers over which the Church of St. John the Baptist stood high when the pilgrim Theodosius visited the site in the late 5th century. The church was destroyed because of earthquakes. Now, those who built it didn't consider earthquakes, because the 2 risks or threats that up to today exist at our site is earthquakes and floods. So the first church built in memory of the baptism of Jesus was destroyed because of earthquakes. Now, our ancestors did not give up. Antoninus, who's described the cave where John lived, we mentioned earlier on, describes the steps we see in the middle of the picture that go down toward the end of the lower part of these are the steps that Antoninus described. But then, ladies and gentlemen, the most important description we have left by a pilgrim called Arcoff from France, who said the following, and I do wish to quote what he said because it's of great importance. Now, he says, if a tall man goes down the steps, the water of the Jordan, he says, arrives to his chest in summer. It would cover his head in winter, but he added, in times of big floods of the Jordan, it would totally immerse the mantle chapel that's built at the place where our Lord was baptized. Happens to be uninhabitable, being built on 4 piers. At the end of the steps, actually, at the lower part, we see the remains of 4 piers, 4 square piers that Arcoff mentioned. Now, what's interesting is the shape of water between these 4 piers. What would it be? It's a cross. Yeah, it's a cross right at the middle of these 4 piers. We know in antiquities that in the Byzantine period, all or most actually baptistries were built to be cruciform, but this happens to be the one and only and largest cruciform baptistry on earth that used the water of the Holy Jordan for pilgrims to be baptized in. So these small remains tell us big stories. I do believe, as an engineer specialized in monument restoration, that stones talk. Some people laugh at me when I say this. Well, actually, they tell us big stories because what you see is built for a very important event that took place. This church that was described, the Cruciform Baptistry, where we have the remains of the 4 piers, also was followed by 2 other basilicas at the top part of our picture, where we have the protection shelter. Yeah, exactly. That's where we have remains of 2 basilicas that were built in the 8th century, in other words, in Islamic period. These 2 basilicas were described by 2 pilgrims from Germany and Britain, Saint Willibald and Epiphanes in the 8th century. But those 2 basilicas were destroyed because of floods of the River Jordan today. Did our ancestors give up? No. The shelter we see closer in the front of our picture, that's built basically on the remains of one of the 4 piers we've talked about earlier on, the front shelter I'm talking about, that was described by a pilgrim from Russia called Danielle. Danielle described a small chapel with a small apse that's built at a place where our Lord was baptized. If we sum up what we have at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we have remains of 5 churches, uniquely designed and built, and a unique cruciform baptistry in a place we don't expect people to live. In the middle of the wilderness, where we have risk of floods and earthquakes, we ask ourselves a simple question. Why did our ancestors insist and challenge the force of nature to build one church after the other right here at this spot, only 100 meters east of the Jordan today? Well, depending on the Bible, depending on the pilgrims' accounts, the archaeological discoveries, we know this is where Jesus baptized and Christianity physically started, when the Holy Spirit descended on our Lord and Christianity started, as I said earlier on. Now, this is the lowest archaeological discovery on earth, but I call it the closest to heaven. This spot is so very important to mankind. Imagine, John met Jesus right here, pointed with his finger saying, "This is the Lamb of God." And after the small argument, John baptized Jesus to fulfill righteousness. That's the moment where the Holy Spirit descended and the voice of the Lord said, "You my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." So it indeed is the highest, the lowest point on earth and closest to heaven. So basically, this is our story, and the messages we always insist upon is, specifically today, ladies and gentlemen, we know what's happening. Sometimes religion is being used for political issues. We in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, I myself, I'll be very honest, I'm a Jordanian Armenian Christian, but we in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan live in harmony together because we do believe that our Hashemite Kingdom and our Hashemite family always concentrate on interfaith harmony, building human bridges of love and peace. So we'd like you to join us to spread this message across in the entire world. Thanks for bearing with me, and I'll be glad to answer any question I can later on. Yeah, maybe we can refer to the picture where we had some important religious visitors. Yeah, this one. I mean, we've had many important heads of churches visit the site in the last 18, 20 years. Although our site was rediscovered after the peace treaty, actually, and this is a story by itself. We had minefields at the site. Now, His Highness Prince Ghazi, who we see with the Arabic shmar, he's the head of our board of trustees, and he was at the site in 1995, actually, right after the peace treaty, with the late Father Miguel Pichirilla of the Franciscan Church, who led His Highness to the site, saying this is a very important biblical site. Therefore, all high-level orders were given to demine the site, and today our honor and pride is that we've returned this site where we had minefields to a place where we've received hundreds of thousands of pilgrims ever since our site was opened. Here, to top left, we have the head of the Baptist World Alliance, Mr. David Coffey, was accompanied by His Royal Highness, and I was explaining to them about the site we just talked about. Then later on, we've had, before that actually, to the right bottom, we have His late Holiness Pope John Paul II, who held the Mass right here at Elijah's Hill, actually, with the presence of over 35,000 Christians. That was the first Pope who visited our site in recent history. Then we have the next slide at the bottom. His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI with His Majesty and the Prince. And I remember at this point when we talked about pilgrims, and I mentioned the pilgrim from Germany, Saint Willibald, who described the church. He said, yes, I know Saint Willibald, I've read about him, you know, I mean, His Holiness is German and he's a professor, so he knows a lot. I mean, whatever we say, they know much better than I do about religious issues. But the last visit was on the 24th of May 2014. I'll never forget this day, to be honest. I had the honor to explain to His Holiness, after he was received and welcomed by their Majesties, the Crown Prince, His Highness Prince Ghazi, and we had a translator because it's not right for me to explain in Italian, of course. So therefore, His Holiness was ever so happy. I'll never forget, he knelt down knowing the importance of the site. I was blessed by the water of the Jordan at the place where the Lord was baptized. And over there, believe it or not, we had a special souvenir for His Holiness, of course, holy water from the spot in a special ceramic jar. But then he asked for a bottle of water, believe it or not. And he wanted to fill it by himself from the spot we were standing. And then we talked about important events that took place after the baptism, of course. Let's not forget that Jesus accompanied the two apostles who were prepared by John, Andrew and Simon, whom Jesus called Peter, the rock over which Christianity would be built. These important events, all of these events took place right here at this spot. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you, as I said earlier on, whatever I said, whatever we've seen in these slides is not enough. If you don't physically visit the site, see every single archaeological discovery that links us with important biblical events, walk in the trails of John and Jesus, you wouldn't feel the spirituality. So you're ever so welcome to visit the site. I assure you, we have SOPs. We'll take good care of you because we do believe now people have to be safe, and we're following strict precautions to make sure of your safety, everybody's safety in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan at the baptism site in specific. So ahlan wa sahlan, we're looking forward to see you, for you to enjoy your site, because it's a World Heritage Site and it's simply your site. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you so much, Rustom. Every time you speak about the site, although I've visited it multiple times, every time you say the story, I just feel the need to visit again. And like Rustom just mentioned, reading the story or listening to someone talking about the story is one thing, but then walking those footsteps of prophets before us that walked it makes it so real, and you start understanding the Bible even more because you're literally starting to imagine yourself and living through the Bible scriptures, and makes the experience so much more spiritual. In the slide, I'd like to show you a video kind of the different sites that Rustom mentioned, and this video wraps it all up and gives you an idea what you or your clients can see during your stay. This is about a 3-minute video with biblical scriptures, so I hope you enjoy it. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and I thought we'd also show you a sample itinerary of what your days could look like and how you can include Bethany Beyond the Jordan into an itinerary. This is showing you a 10-day where you arrive in Amman and you start your trip in the northern part of Jordan. Which includes Jarash, Tel Marlias, Qais, which is the northern tip of Jordan, and Pella. Amman is the capital of Jordan, and it has a significant importance, like Rustom mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. So we'd always recommend that you add a day to see downtown Amman and get the story of Amman told to you and the biblical significance that it also has. Close to Amman would be Mount Nebo and Madaba. A lot of our visitors like to visit both sites together. They're about 15 to 20 minutes away by car, so it's easily doable in one day. You could see that we added Bethany Beyond the Jordan towards the end, but there is the option to always customize this and add Bethany Beyond the Jordan after Mount Nebo and Madaba, given that they're close enough. Before you head to the south to see Petra, which is one of the 7 wonders of the world. And then our southern tip is Aqaba, which is the Red Sea, the sea that you also saw on the video. And Wadi Rum is always a nice place to kind of, I'd like to call it this massive desert where the only sounds you hear or the only things you're seeing are the stars and the moon, and there's sometimes some Bedouin music in the background, but at some point they turn the music off and all you hear is really your thoughts. So you're really kind of on your own, and it's a nice end to a spiritual journey. And then you could finish your trip by visiting the Dead Sea. And like I said, some people add Bethany Beyond the Jordan right before the Dead Sea and visit the whole site in one day. There is also a pilgrimage stay over there where you could book it. And I'll show you where you could find that in the next slide, but you could stay a full day because the site has a lot of significance, and the story that Rustom told us, once you go there and walk around and pray or choose to baptize yourself, which is always an option, it could take a full day to immerse yourself in all of these stories. And a nice way to fully end the trip is through the Dead Sea, not only because it's not too far from the airport, but it's also the lowest point on earth, full of spas. It's a nice experience to float in the sea and just complete relaxation and wellness, and a nice way to end a trip, and then from there go to the airport, back home or to your next destination. But of course, these are sample. This is just a sample itinerary. It's customizable. You could add more days. You could take out some days, but it's recommended that you do Jordan as a standalone sometimes, because it has a lot of holy sites worth visiting, and would take a good 9 to 10 days to get the fullest experience. We're going to take your questions, but these websites are really worth visiting. One is the baptism site, which will tell you more about the site and a lot of information about how to get baptized there if you decide to do so, and just talks more extensively about the site. And the other site is holyjordan.com, which is a site that has different sample itineraries. One is, for example, following the footsteps of Jesus. Another is following the footsteps of John the Baptist. So there's a lot of tools and resources that you could take from there and show your clients. There's also videos and pictures. It also shows you different travel deals that you could take a look at and see what's available out there. I'm going to read some of the questions, if you don't mind, Rustom, from here, and we can start answering them one by one, and we'll try to cover as many questions as we can. And just a reminder, everyone, this recording, I will be able to send it to you sometime in the near future. It's going to be downloaded as an MP4 and shared with you, should you need to show it to your clients or have it saved for future reference. Eventually, it will make its way also on the website, holyjordan.com. Thank you again, Rustom, for this great information, and I'll go ahead and read some of the questions.
Thank you.
That was great, Rustom. We saw some, we received some questions, so I'll read a few. And any questions that we cannot answer right now, I'll make sure to follow up with you and answer those. One question I think is just more on the general end, which is when is Jordan going to open? So currently Jordan is actually open for tourists. However, right now the government's still requiring a 7-day quarantine, either in a hotel or a friend's house. If you have any people that you know there, you could stay there. But wherever you decide to stay, it has to be in the same place. You cannot jump around. But we were also told that beginning of 2021, they're gonna stop this quarantine, and there will be no quarantine from the United States or any country around the world. Currently, they're asking for a PCR test 120 hours in advance, so that is 5 days before. So make sure you have that, because the flight, you won't be able to board the flight without that. But again, as of 2021, we're told that there will be no quarantine. So I'm hoping that that's exciting news and will allow more tourists to consider Jordan for their next destination. One other question is also about the same thing. One is, how long do you think they need to spend in Bethany Beyond the Jordan? Rustom, that's for you.
Well, we'd like them to spend the whole day. I mean, it deserves it. It's worth it. I mean, the experience is there from Elijah's Hill. We need at least 1 hour over there. And then walking along the trail and the spring, that's a spiritual journey where you can go back in time. Imagine John living in this wilderness, all of this needs the experience. You walk slowly, imagine what took place around 2,000 years ago. Maybe get closer with God and your relation, then arrive at the gem of gems. The church is built in memory of the baptism. Over there, we generally spend around 1 hour. People can pray over there, have a mass, and we have enough areas to do so. At the end, you've mentioned it earlier, Zina, thankfully, people can get baptized. Priests are available specifically from certain denominations, but then they'll be ready to serve others if they have, like, we don't have an Armenian Orthodox priest at the site, but then they'll be ready soon. I want to add that we, by this next summer, are going to have a new visitor center that includes a beautiful museum, the story of the site, discoveries from during the last 20 years, panels, videos. All of this needs at least half an hour. Those who are interested can even take more time. So therefore, at the end, we'll have small 3-star restaurants and things that they can do that, generally speaking, you mentioned earlier, Zina, and I thank you for that. Maybe a whole day or even more from MADABA to Mount Nebo to Bethany Beyond the Jordan. That would be a great spiritual journey. And by the end of 2021, hopefully, we're going to have the trail from Makarios down to Bethany Beyond Jordan. We wish someday we could continue it as our ancestors did, arrive to Jerusalem at the end of the day. That's true peace building. So therefore, the site is worth every single moment spent there.
Yes, indeed. One other question, Rustom, is also about the pilgrimage accommodation at the baptism site. Is it currently open due to COVID? Will it continue to be open? And they're asking how they can book it.
Yeah, we're open. As you know, in Jordan, we have Urdunna Jannah, Jordan is heaven, program. Those residing in Jordan, whether it be Jordanians or others, visit the site regularly. And starting March, we're going to have a new version of this that will include the 3 most important sites, MADABA, Mount Nebo, and Bethany Beyond Jordan. Regarding the pilgrimage stations, now we only have one functioning right now. The second is being prepared. One is a Russian Orthodox pilgrimage house that has 50 double rooms, very clean, hygienic, very well served. At the same time, it's very, very cheap, to be honest. And we have the Greek Orthodox monastery that has around 15 rooms only. But later on, hopefully we have designated actually an area at the entrance of our site for investment. We hope at the end of the day, because we know millions of pilgrims will get there, and we're going to have a pilgrimage village. This will take some time because it has to stick and abide by international charters, UNESCO charters, etc. But accommodation is very close if our pilgrims wish to go to the Dead Sea area where we have 5-star hotels they can choose from.
Okay. One other question was about the slide where you showed the cave where John the Baptist lived, and people are wondering if it's open to visit, meaning that can they go inside the cave?
Well, generally speaking, I'll be very honest, because it's ever so precious, we only allow it if we're sure that they're wearing proper shoes, etc. They can do it very slowly, but they have to tell the local guide. If I'm with them, I'll be happy to take them. We only do it, and when I get inside the monastery walls today, we have just a rope to make people understand that it's very fragile remains. We need to take care of them. But a lot of people wish to say a prayer over there, and we can't say no. Okay. But as long as they're careful, because this is something we've inherited from our ancestors, we'd like it to stay safe for generations to come.
Yeah. One question, and I think it's more on the general end, which is when is the best time to visit Jordan? And I always like to say that Jordan is a year-round destination, but we end up recommending spring and fall, and reason being the weather between the north and the south of Jordan is significantly different. So to enjoy all these sites without getting too hot or too cold, fall and spring end up being the best options. But again, it's a year-round destination, so you could still do it during the winter or during the
So, excuse me, Zina, I'd like to make it clear. Today I was at the site wearing a shirt. It's beautiful, even in December, because there's a 7-degree difference between Amman and the baptism site area. So therefore, it's a little harder during July, August. I do agree. But then throughout the year, as the baptism site, and as you've mentioned it earlier, we have various sites, geographic areas where people can spend throughout the year.
Yeah. For any questions relating to COVID, I'll make sure to in the follow-up to include all the websites that you can check. And specifically, there is myjordanjourney.com. A pop-up will open, or at the top of the website, you're going to see a COVID ribbon. You could press that, and any updates, we always share them there. You'll get the latest updates about COVID and about the airports and the opening and what type of testing you need. You will all find it there. We can take, I still think, one more question before this ends, and they're saying, how difficult is the walking when visiting these sites, and specifically Bethany Beyond the Jordan?
Thank you ever so much for this question and who's asked it. Well, actually, we have a lot of people wish to walk it, but we have club cars that can do the journey in certain places where a 2 to 2.5 kilometer or around 1.5 mile walk is needed. But I personally encourage people to walk it because you truly feel and experience what John and Jesus did. You're just walking in their footsteps. But otherwise, we do have club cars. It's very cheap. It's around $30 per car, which takes seven pilgrims or guests. So therefore, it's part of but sometimes we offer it for free too, specifically these days because we don't have many visitors. But here, allow me to say that Americans specifically and your area, we used to receive most of our pilgrims. 25% more or less of our pilgrims are from the United States. But we are so anxious to see them once again. Hopefully we're ready. Our museum will be ready, our visitor center area, because I've read a few questions saying that it brings back memories and visited a few years ago, etc., etc. I assure you, COVID has its positive points too, because we've taken care of the site. We've done things that we couldn't have done during the presence of thousands of pilgrims per day. So therefore, they're going to see a new museum. The spring can be enjoyed and they can walk along the trail and many other things. I'll leave it as a surprise for those who'd like to visit.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to answer just one more question before we leave, and I'm trying to actually find it. What is the status of the Angelical Church at the baptism site? Is there any Angelical churches coming to the baptism?
Well, right now, actually, whoever have built before we had the site inscribed on the World Heritage List on the 3rd of July 2015, we're lucky. Now, those who asked to build new churches, I'll be very honest, it goes through certain procedures. First of all, it has to get the approval of the Board of Trustees. Second, they provide architectural designs. It has to go through UNESCO for revision. It has to stick and abide by HIA and EIA, which is Heritage Impact Assessment and Environmental Impact Assessment studies and experts, and nobody can put a stone right now at the baptism site without the approval of UNESCO. But yet we have a location that we haven't seen on our slides, where we have a small area dedicated for the Baptists. And even we have a small pool, because generally speaking, they come in big numbers, and some of them wish to be baptized in clean water. I'm not saying, please don't misunderstand, I'm not saying the Jordan River is not clean. It's a little muddy today. That's all. But nevertheless, some people wish to be baptized in a pool. We get the water from the river, and it goes through an RO, reverse osmosis, where we have fresh water and a beautiful pool, good, clean changing rooms, and a pastor is ready generally to come from Amman or elsewhere to baptize. Sometimes they bring it along with them. But then we have, at the River Jordan, around 200 meters from the churches built in memory of the baptism of Christ, we have another location that can take around 400 persons in 1 hour at a set time, where they can enjoy, say, a prayer. Some of them get baptized, and it has more privacy, actually, because it's, you know, it even reminds me of biblical times, because you don't see nothing but the river and some reeds along it. Yeah. So the spiritual experience is completely different there.
Yeah, that's great. We still have actually many questions. So because of time, we'll make sure to answer them by email. And one of the follow-up emails will have the answers to these questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this. And thank you again, Rustom, for being here. This was wonderful.
Most welcome. It's always a pleasure and an honor. We're looking forward to see you all here in Jordan once again.
We do. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye.